He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. All 8 of his business guests, standing in my living room with their cocktails, already starting to look at me like I was the help. "You're not going anywhere, Mildred. Change your clothes and get those hors d'oeuvres out of the oven. This dinner matters more than your little garden club." I had my purse on my shoulder and my hand on the front door of a house I had owned for 31 years. "I beg your pardon?" I said. He stepped closer, not threatening exactly, but the way he moved said everything. "I said you're staying. We need someone to serve. I told you about this dinner 2 weeks ago." He had not told me anything 2 weeks ago. He had told me 3 days ago that he was hosting some clients and could I please make something nice. I had said I had plans I couldn't change. He had nodded. I thought that was the end of it. "Darren," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I have a commitment I made a month ago. Call a catering service." His face changed. That smile he always wore, the easy, charming one my daughter fell in love with, just dissolved. "A catering service," he repeated, and now there was an edge in his voice I felt like a hand around my throat. "You live here for free. You eat our food, use our electricity, and you can't do one thing for us?" Our electricity, our food. In the house I'd paid off in 2008, with the husband whose name had been beside mine on the deed for 38 years. I looked at him. I looked at the guests who had gone very quiet. I looked down the hallway to where my daughter Kathleen was standing in the kitchen doorway, with an apron tied around her waist, and a look on her face I had learned to recognize. That small collapse behind the eyes that meant she was not going to say a word. And I made a decision. "This is my house," I said, not loudly. I didn't need to be loud, and I am leaving. He laughed, one short, disbelieving sound. "Your house," he said. "Right. You keep telling yourself that." I walked out. The warm October air hit my face and I kept walking to my car, and I did not let myself cry until I was 2 blocks away. To understand how I got to that moment, how a 67-year-old woman who had raised a daughter, survived a husband's death, and paid every bill in that house for 3 decades ended up being spoken to like that in her own entryway, you'd have to go back 5 years. My husband passed in the spring of 2021. Pancreatic cancer, 64 days from diagnosis to the end. We'd had 38 years together, and then I had the house, the garden he'd planted along the back fence, and a silence that felt physical, like something pressing down on my chest every morning when I woke up. Kathleen came home for the funeral and never really left. I was grateful at first. She was my only child, and having her there those first weeks, her familiar footsteps, the coffee already made when I came downstairs, it helped. When she suggested she and Darren move in for a while they were between places, I said yes without hesitating. That was my first mistake. Not because I should have known what Darren was. I couldn't have known that then. My first mistake was saying yes to something temporary without defining what temporary meant. For a while became 6 months, then a year, then 2. And somewhere in that stretch of time, the shape of the house shifted. I couldn't point to the exact moment. That's the thing about this kind of erosion. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way a river changes its banks. Slowly, patiently, until one day you look and the landscape you knew is entirely different. It started with the master bedroom. I was still sleeping in it, still in the room where my husband and I had spent 38 winters, when Darren came to me with that easy smile and suggested they really needed more space. His home office was crammed into the second bedroom. The baby monitor signal didn't reach far enough. Couldn't I be comfortable in the guest room downstairs? It was cozy, he said. Plenty of space for just one person. I almost said no. I remember standing in that hallway holding the feeling of something important, something I was about to set down and not be able to pick back up. But Kathleen was standing behind him with apologetic eyes, and she said quietly, "Mom, it would really help us," and I let it go. I want you to understand. I am not someone who doesn't speak up. When my daughter was 8 and her teacher gave her a 0 for work she'd done fair and square, I was in that principal's office the next morning. When my husband's employer tried to shortchange his pension, I hired a lawyer. I am not a passive woman. But there is a particular kind of manipulation that works specifically on people who love someone. It doesn't look like cruelty. It looks like need. Every time I pushed back, Darren would get quiet and wounded. "I'm just trying to build something for your daughter and your granddaughter, Mildred. I thought you wanted that." And Kathleen would look at me like I was the one causing the storm until I wasn't sure anymore what I had actually said or why. That's called gaslighting. I didn't have the word for it then, I have it now. By the third year, I had become, in all the ways that mattered, the household help. I cooked, I cleaned. I watched little Chloe 3 days a week while Darren worked from his home office upstairs, and Kathleen took the downtown job she'd always wanted. The one she said she could only accept because I was there. I didn't mind the cooking. I didn't mind Chloe. Lord, I loved that child with everything I had. What I minded was that none of it was ever acknowledged. It was simply expected. It was just what I did because where else would I go? The one thing I protected fiercely was Tuesday afternoons. Every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, I drove to my friend Rosemary's house for garden club. 7 of us, women in our 60s and 70s, who had been meeting since before half our grandchildren were born. We talked about perennials and seed catalogs, and sometimes we talked about harder things, the kind of things you can only say to people who have known you long enough that there is no pretending required. It was the one part of my week that still belonged entirely to me. Darren had started making comments. Garden club again? You were just there. Always with that small laugh, the one that meant he was joking but wasn't. 3 weeks before the dinner party, he had told Kathleen, not me, Kathleen, that he thought I should cut back on outside commitments because Chloe needed more consistency. Kathleen passed this along with apologetic eyes, and I told her, calmly and clearly, that Tuesdays were non-negotiable. He hadn't forgotten that. I drove to Rosemary's the night he humiliated me in front of his guests. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. Sit, she said. I'll get the tea. Rosemary has known me for 22 years. She let me talk until I ran out of words, and when I was done, she was quiet for a long moment. What does your deed say? She asked. There is no mortgage. The house is paid off. The title transferred to me alone after my husband passed. I went through probate, the whole process. It's in my name. Rosemary set down her mug. Then I need to tell you something. Last month at the neighborhood association meeting, you weren't there. Darren was talking to a few people, saying you'd been having memory trouble, forgetting appointments, getting confused about things. The tea in my hands went cold. I don't have memory trouble. I know that. I've known you for 22 years. But he said it, Mildred, in front of people who don't know you like I do. She paused. My nephew Stuart is an elder law attorney. I think you should call him. I called Stuart the next morning. He asked me to come in with every document I had. The deed, the will, my husband's death certificate, the probate paperwork. I drove to his office with a folder I'd assembled the night before, unable to sleep. Stuart was calm, in a way that felt deliberate, like someone who had learned to project steadiness because the people who sat across from him usually needed it badly. He reviewed everything. Then he looked at me. Your title is clean, he said. The house is yours with no encumbrances, no liens, no cosigners, no one else with any claim. Good, I said, so there's nothing he can do. Stuart was quiet for a moment. There is one legal pathway that can be used against property owners in your situation. If someone initiates an adult guardianship proceeding, claiming you lack the capacity to manage your own affairs, and that proceeding succeeds, the appointed guardian gains legal authority over your assets, including real property. I felt something cold move through me. And if he's already been telling people I have memory problems, then he may be establishing a record, Stuart said carefully. The process requires witnesses willing to provide sworn statements about observed cognitive decline, a psychiatric evaluation, and a family court judge. If you have no legal representation and no counter evidence on file, it can move faster than most people expect. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind absolutely clear. That night, after Darren had gone upstairs to his home office and Kathleen was putting Chloe to bed, I went to the small desk in what had been the formal dining room, now used as Darren's filing area, though he'd never formally asked permission. I opened the top drawer. I want to be clear, I was not going through his things out of spite or suspicion. I was looking for proof of something already moving toward me. I was protecting myself in my own home. In the second drawer, under what appeared to be tax documents, I found a manila envelope. Inside were bank statements from an account I hadn't known about, not the household account he shared with Kathleen. His balance was $847. The statements showed a pattern of withdrawals over the past 14 months that didn't correspond to any household expense I could identify. Behind those was a statement from a separate lending institution, a personal line of credit. Balance owed $94,000. I kept looking. In the back of the drawer was a folded printout of an email chain. I opened it. The subject line read, Property Strategy Capacity Proceeding Timeline. The correspondent, someone identified only as R. Fowler, appearing to be a legal consultant of some kind, had written to Darren with detailed information about initiating adult guardianship proceedings in our state. He quoted a timeline of 3 to 6 months for the full process. He mentioned that 2 witnesses would need to provide affidavits about observed cognitive and behavioral decline. He mentioned a psychiatrist he worked with who was, in his words, familiar with these types of situations. And then one line that I had to read 3 times before my brain would fully process it. Once guardianship is established, the guardian has authority to liquidate real property. Given the assessed value you mentioned, net proceeds after legal fees and your outstanding line of credit would leave approximately $280,000 clear. His line of credit, $94,000. He was planning to pay it with my house. Underneath the email was a real estate agent's preliminary valuation dated 6 weeks earlier. My address at the top, estimated market value, $387,000. My house, the one my husband and I had bought in 1993, the one with his roses along the back fence. I photographed every document with my phone. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I walked upstairs to the small guest room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I did not cry. I was past the part of this that wanted tears. I was somewhere else entirely now, a place of cold, focused clarity that felt almost like relief. I texted Rosemary, need to see Stuart again, found everything. Her reply came in under a minute. I'll call him first thing. The following 10 days were the longest of my life and also, strangely, the most purposeful I had felt since before my husband got sick. Stuart filed a preemptive motion with the family court establishing my legal competence. A formal declaration supported by a full neuropsychological evaluation, my clean medical history, and affidavits from all 7 members of my garden club. Stuart also sent a certified letter to R. Fowler informing him that his client's intended actions would constitute elder financial abuse under state law, a felony, and that we had documented evidence of the conspiracy. He also contacted a forensic accountant who pulled the title records. That's when we found what hadn't been in the drawer. 6 weeks earlier, Darren had approached a mortgage broker using a power of attorney document bearing what was supposed to be my signature. Stuart looked at it and said flatly, "That's not notarized correctly and the signature doesn't match your deed." Forgery, on top of everything else. I spent those 10 days at home going through the motions of ordinary life. I cooked dinner. I watched Chloe on Tuesday mornings. I smiled at the right moments. Darren had no idea. He was so certain of his own cleverness. So sure I was exactly what he had decided I was, a soft-minded old woman with no one in her corner, that it never once occurred to him that I might be watching him right back. I remember one evening he poured himself a bourbon and sat across from me while I was reading, and said, almost kindly, "You know, you should really let us handle the financial stuff, Mildred. It's a lot to manage at your age. We could simplify things." I looked at him over my reading glasses. "I've managed the finances in this house for 31 years, I said. "I'll keep doing it." He shrugged and changed the subject, but I caught the look that crossed his face first, irritation, and underneath it something sharper. He was running low on patience. 3 weeks after the dinner party, on a Friday evening, he and Kathleen called what he described as a family meeting. I knew what it was before I sat down. He had assembled people, his brother, a neighbor named Phil from 2 houses down, and a woman I'd met once at a barbecue who was apparently a friend of Kathleen's from work. Witnesses. The foundation of his affidavits. Darren sat at the head of my dining room table and spoke to me with the slow, patient tone of someone addressing a person whose grip on reality was questionable. "We've been worried about you," he said. "Your memory. Some of the things you've said lately. We think it might be time to look at some options, places that specialize in supporting people at your stage of life." "You mean a care facility?" I said. "A community," he said smoothly, "somewhere with support around the clock." His brother nodded. Phil nodded. Kathleen sat beside Darren and stared at the table. "Kathleen," I said. She looked up. "Do you want me out of this house?" The room went absolutely still. Darren's jaw tightened, but I kept my eyes on my daughter and watched something shift in her face. A trembling at the corner of her mouth, a fracturing of whatever she had been holding together for 3 years. Do you want me out of this house? I asked again softly. No, she whispered. Kathleen Darren started. No, her voice was steadier this time. No, I don't. It was the bravest thing I had seen her do in years, maybe ever. I turned to Darren. I'd like to introduce you to someone. Stuart had been waiting in his car outside. I had texted him 10 minutes before they called me to the table. He walked in now with his briefcase, nodded to the room, and set a folder on the table without drama. I'm an elder law attorney representing Mildred, who is the sole legal owner of this property, he said, in the same calm voice he would use to read a grocery list. I'm here to inform you that we have filed a preemptive legal competency declaration with the family court, supported by full medical and neuropsychological evaluation and signed affidavits from 7 witnesses. I'm also here to inform you that we have documented a pattern of conduct constituting elder financial abuse under state statute, including forgery of a power of attorney instrument and conspiracy to commit fraud. He placed copies of the photographs on the table. The email chain with R. Fowler, the forged power of attorney, the mortgage broker correspondence, the bank statement showing $94,000 in debt. Phil stood up and left without a word. Darren's brother looked at him and said quietly, "What did you do?" Darren's face cycled through several expressions in the space of 4 seconds. He landed on defiance. "This is my family's home." "It is not," Stuart said. "The deed is in Mildred's name alone, as it has been since 2022. You have no legal claim to this property, and the actions you have taken over the past 8 weeks constitute a felony under state law." Kathleen put her face in her hands. Darren looked at me for a long moment, and then something went out of his eyes. That comfortable certainty that he was smarter than everyone in the room. It drained away like water through sand. "I needed the money," he said. "It came out smaller than he probably intended." "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry your finances are in the state they are. But you do not get to solve that by taking what belongs to me." He was arrested 2 days later on charges of elder financial fraud and forgery of a legal instrument, felonies in our state. R. Fowler was charged as a co-conspirator. The psychiatrist Fowler had referenced, the one familiar with these types of cases, was referred to the state medical board. Kathleen filed for divorce the same week. She came to me the night after she filed, sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, and she said, "I'm so sorry, Mom. I knew something was wrong. Not everything, not the legal part, but the way he spoke to you. The way he spoke about you when you weren't in the room. I told myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed." "I know," I said. "That's not good enough. I know it's not." "No, it isn't, but it's where we are, and we go forward from here." We sat at the table for a long time that night, the way we hadn't since, before she moved in with him when she used to drive out on Sunday mornings, and we'd drink coffee in the garden and watch the birds at the feeder her father had hung from the oak tree. The criminal case resolved 4 months later. Darren pleaded guilty to elder financial fraud. He received a 3-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent prohibition from serving in any fiduciary capacity. R. Fowler received supervised probation and lost his license. Kathleen and Chloe stayed, but not the way things had been before. We sat down together, Kathleen and I, with Stuart present, and we wrote an actual agreement, on paper, signed by both of us. She would contribute a set amount toward household expenses each month proportional to her income. The guest room was mine to return to her if I ever wanted it. I moved back into the master bedroom the same week. I retained full authority over any decisions concerning the property. Any changes to household arrangements would be discussed and agreed upon in advance. Boundaries, written down mutual. The first morning she brought coffee out to me in the garden without being asked. Just the way she used to when she'd come home from college and we'd sit outside before the world fully woke up. I thought, this is what it was supposed to be all along. Chloe asked me once, about 6 months after everything settled, why her daddy wasn't living with us anymore. She was 6. She still loved him. She always would. He was her father, and that was not mine to disturb. Sometimes, I said carefully, people we love make choices that hurt other people, and when that happens, there are consequences. Did he hurt you, Grandma? I looked at her, her dark eyes so like her mother's. He tried to, I said, but I didn't let him. She considered this with the seriousness that 6-year-olds reserve for the things that genuinely matter to them. Because you're strong, she said. Because I asked for help when I needed it, I said. That's what strong really looks like, sweetheart. I put fresh curtains in the master bedroom windows in January, white with a thin blue stripe, the kind my husband always said looked like a proper New England summer, even in the dead of winter. I set his photograph back on the dresser where it had always belonged. In the spring, I planted sweet peas along the back fence, running them up the trellis he had built. They bloomed in June, pink and lavender and white, a few at a time, filling the whole yard with a sweetness that almost hurt to breathe in. Rosemary sat beside me at garden club the first Tuesday, after everything was resolved, and said, "How does it feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Like waking up," I said. "Like I've been half asleep for 5 years and I finally just came back to myself." "You were never asleep," she said firmly. "You were surviving. There's a difference." There is a difference. I know that now. Here is what else I know, and I'm going to say it plainly because someone out there needs to hear it. If someone is telling other people that your mind is slipping, and no one has said a single word of this to your face, that is not concern. Take it as the warning it is. If the people who say they're doing everything for you have quietly arranged things so that your opinions are overridden in the house that has your name on the deed, that is not family. That is something else, and you are allowed to name it for what it is. Know your deed. Know your title. In the United States, elder financial abuse is a felony in most states. There are attorneys who specialize in exactly this. Call them before you think you need to, not after. I was 67 years old when I walked out of my own front door rather than be humiliated one more time in front of strangers. And then I walked back in, with an attorney, with evidence, with a legal declaration of competence already filed, and I reclaimed what had been mine since the day my husband and I signed those papers at the closing table in 1993. It is still mine. I am 68 now. My daughter makes coffee on Sunday mornings, and we sit in the garden where her father's roses are still blooming, and my granddaughter chases fireflies in the long summer evenings and calls out for me to look, to watch, to see, and I am here, present, in my house, on my terms, in the life that was always supposed to be mine. If you are out there and someone has been quietly, patiently convincing you that you are less than what you are not. You never were. It is not too late to walk back in on your own terms. I promise you that.